views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Hi, this is Barry Fitzgerald, and I'll see you in the shadows.
Your source for everything paranormal. Para X.
Welcome to another Monday night here on the Shadows Radio. I am Rebecca, and I have a excellent co-host who doesn't get to talk on his own show, so I figured I'd give him a chance to talk on my show. So filling in for Kara tonight is James from Strange Things Radio. Hey, James.
How you doing, Rebecca? Hi, is everyone out there?
See, this is what James sounds like when he's allowed to talk. just.
So yeah, I'm so used to, honestly, he's kind of right. I'm used to, like, pulling in the information. He continues to talk. I throw in a few words, and then, so, yes. So, Rebecca's going to do, so what's tonight's show about, Rebecca?
Well, before we jump into that, we got to do all the boring housekeeping crap. So,
okay.
Yes, so we are going to say that if you want to podcast any of the past shows, you can do so. Go to theshadowsradio.com, and on the left-hand side, there's all of our Podomatic streams, Podomatic, Podbean, iTunes, blah, 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 all the streams that you can think of, they are there. So feel free to, or on the right-hand side, you can click on the on-demand library and actually play them directly from our site, which is always fun as well. We are uploading the most recent shows actually as we speak, so they should be up within the next day or two. So if you want to grab some of those, feel free to do so. Or you can go all the way back to 2011 if you really want to dust off the old clunkers, because there's some pretty bad ones in there. You know, when you start a show and you're like, this is awkward. Let's read this script line for line. Yeah, you had a couple of those. It was pretty bad.
Wow.
Oh, they're in there.
You know what's funny? My very first show, we don't have a copy of it. I have all 5 years of my show except for the first one. Someone decided not to record the show.
My first show was 12 minutes long because we couldn't figure out how to connect to the server.
We were live on AM radio. Almost our first year, I was doing my show. I was live on AM radio, and the board people decided the first show no one's going to record it. And I'm like, okay. We didn't know how many people. We literally had no one who knew we were talking to, because the way that AM station was, they didn't pay for any of the Arbitron rankings or any of those kind of stuff. And they're like, I said, how do we know who's listening to us? They go, we don't. So no one could be listening to us? Well, you don't know.
Just pretend they're all listening to you.
We're like, wow. So that was crazy. So, all right.
Yes. So, all right. So tonight we are going to dive into a fun topic that I think is kind of ridiculous and yet awesome all at the same time. So a couple of weeks back, Barbara from the Paranormal View was on the show, and we talked all about now I forget the show. Josh Gates' show. Why am I forgetting the name of the show?
You mean I almost said it's church stuff.
No.
I'm old.
Gosh,
God Gates' new show. He was
All right. Well, Josh Gates' new show. He opened a tomb live on air. I was a little afraid it was going to be one of those like Al Capone's crypt kind of moments, but it wasn't. They actually found a really cool mummy that was all intact, and so Barbara and I kind of took that apart piece by piece, and we talked about that show, and that was a lot of fun. And after that, I was like, wow, this is great. I'm going to dive into more of that kind of stuff. Not that I wanted to dive into
his show is
What?
I got this thing up. I pulled it up while you're talking. I can't say the word. EXPEDITION.
Expedition Unknown. There we go.
Thank you.
Expedition
I couldn't
Unknown.
get the word out.
So I feel like the Egyptian names in this script are going to kill you then, right? Is that
Oh, absolutely. So anyone who's listening to my show, no, I can't pronounce crap. But so just...
All right. So what we're going to talk about is the Curse of King Tut's tomb, which I'm sure everyone's kind of heard of it at some point. And like I said, we talked about that, and I was like, this is great. So I was going to dig into more stuff, and I was trying to find something paranormally related to ancient Egypt and tombs and all that kind of stuff. So there we went into King Tut's tomb. So it's going to be fun. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about kind of what this is. So the King Tut's curse is also known as the Curse of the Pharaoh, which is allegedly a curse that's believed by some to be cast on a person who disturbs the mummy of an ancient Egyptian person, especially royal mummies. Like, it seems to be most tied to kind of like the higher ups in the thing, the high priest, the pharaohs, the family of pharaohs, that kind of thing. Supposedly these curses cause bad luck, illness, death, all the fun stuff. Nothing like in the movie where like they crack open the tomb and like, a bunch of scarabs fly out and everybody gets eaten. Nothing like that. But it's supposed to be more just like a karma thing. And it seems to most frequently appear on tombs from the Old Kingdom era, so before the unification of Egypt. And the wording of the curses have been found not to really differentiate between those who disturb a mummy for science and those who are there to rob a tomb. So I think when they buried a bunch of people, they didn't really say, archaeologists in the future are going to dig up my dead relatives. Let's exempt them from the karma thing. No, they kind of was like, anybody who digs us up, you're all going to rot. So there's a couple of curses that appear on the inside of the facade of some ancient tombs. The mastaba, which is a flat roof rectangular structure used as a burial site. It kind of looks like the pyramid, but you like chop the top off it. At Kentika Ikake, at the 6th century dynasty at Saqqara, directs the Ka priests to protect the tomb carefully and preserve its ritual purity. That one does not directly mention robbers or tomb raiders or anything like that. It just kind of says, priest, to protect our space. And then there's a quote that says, "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb impure, there will be judgment. An end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird, and I shall cast the fear of myself into him." And that is the rough translation of the hieroglyphs of the actual curse itself. So I would say that's pretty much a good, leave my body alone, you jerks. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because when you sent me that information, I read through it, and then I decided to go hunt around a little bit. And I found out something interesting.
Sure.
A lot of times these kings and stuff like that would especially when they're talking about gods, a lot of these kings made themselves with the man gods. Well, a lot of times the next pharaoh would go, "Oh, no, the guy behind me was wrong. I'm the true one, and this is why." Well, then they would turn around and destroy those people's tombs.
Yep.
And they would say, "Oh, well," and so some of them got smart and said, hey, why don't we put curses on these things so that the group ahead of us can't come back and, destroy it. That's why they didn't really talk about robbers and stuff. They wouldn't think about people stealing. They're talking about people destroying them and their legacy. Egyptians loved legacy, and the reason why you see all these massive tombs and the buildings and the pyramids. They wanted to build stuff that lasts for centuries, and because they're all about, hey, this is me, and you're gonna love me for the next 1,000 years, millennium. So I think that's part of why they did that. Just my personal opinion. It just kind of seemed like, because every time it seemed like one pharaoh would go back and destroy everything. The previous pharaoh, and King Tut was notorious for that. He did that to his father, which we will get into later in the show.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There's actually a lot of that when you do look at like Egyptology and things. It's very common to say, well, this was built by Tut, and then if you look here, somebody carved over Tut and they wrote, Ramses, and you're like, oh, so who actually built it? Well, let's see. If we dig all the way down to the bottom, we can figure it out. But yeah, it's kind of like exactly what you said. You just kind of putting your stamp over somebody else's stamp to make sure that, remember me more than that guy. So
they are like tagging, like they do when they're tagging, and they do artwork, and they spray paint, and then the guy behind them turns around and re-spray paints over someone else's and re-tags it, and they just keep going. They're just re-tagging each other.
Yeah, the original graffiti artists there with their tags.
Yeah.
So some of the other curses that I found. So the tomb of Antifi, which was the 9th to 10th dynasty, said, and this is a quote, any ruler who shall do evil or wickedness to this coffin, may Hemen not accept any goods he offered, and may his heir not inherit. So that one sounds to me exactly like you're saying. It's actually directly pointed at the next ruler to come down the line, saying, you might be pharaoh now, but if you touch my stuff, your heir is not going to inherit anything, and so your line pretty much ends with you. So that's kind of exactly what you were saying. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just think it's interesting. They talk about these different dynasties, the 6th dynasty, and it's like you wonder, and that's one thing I was going to look up is, how long are these dynasties? You know what I'm saying? Were they like for 10 years or were they like 50 years? I just keep finding these, you say, oh, the 9th to 10th dynasty. It's like, damn.
Yeah, so I actually did look that up because I was curious, because I know in like Chinese culture, the dynasties are defined by the reign of the current ruling family. And actually, if you look at many European monarchies, it's the same way. So like the House of Tudor in England, then it was the House of Windsor, so it's based on like the royal line passed down. And actually, the dynasties here are kind of defined the same way. So it's father to son, and then when that line breaks and it goes to a distaff relative, so a cousin, an uncle, general, somebody else, that's when the new dynasty starts. So they can be anywhere from 50 years to 100 years, depending. And I think the majority of them kind of range in between like 75 to 100 years. They don't last very long. I did actually look that up.
You did good research there.
I love research. I am a big nerd of research. Okay, so some of the other ones I want to read some of these because these are kind of fun. So a lot of the curses that are actually carved will invoke Thoth for vengeance. So that's the god Thoth for vengeance, or Sekhmet to rain destruction on the victim, which always just sounds fun to me. So rain destruction. But here's a couple of them that I actually found. So, quote, cursed be to those who disturb the rest of a pharaoh, that they shall break the seal of this tomb, shall meet death by a disease that no doctor can diagnose. Ouch. Like, that's just, ow. That just sounds rough. Some other ones. So, as for anybody who shall enter this tomb in his impurity, I shall wring his neck as a bird. That sounds like the first one, but very similar. As for any man who shall destroy these, it is the god Thoth who shall destroy him. Again, pretty straightforward. You touch me, I'm going to F you up. So, As for him who shall destroy this inscription, he shall not reach his home. He shall not embrace his children. He shall not see success. So that one's a little more ominous, that one. Like, that one's pretty much, you bust this up and you're going to die. Or, I guess, be stuck in the tomb. I'm not sure which. It doesn't officially say die. It just says you're going to get stuck. So, I mean, they're pretty harsh.
Oh, yeah. especially they talk about not being able to. It sounds like you're because again, I think Egyptians were big into their heritage. What's going to happen after me, and so a lot of these are you should like you say, he should not embrace his children. He should not see success. Because a lot of these, they felt the success was, the growth of their children, their children's children. And so a lot of these were, you might die, but also your children are going to die, or you're not going to have any children. I want to, I'm pretty much going to wreck your whole dynasty is going to get wrecked if you touch me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the biggest insults that you could do to somebody at that time was not so much I'm going to hurt you, but I'm going to make it so your son is not successful. Like, that's the thing, because then you rub out the family name. Because if your son's already alive, that means you've already passed on the family name to the next line. But if he is not successful and he doesn't have a son, then your family name dies with him. And that's like the worst thing you can do is not only is your son not going to be successful, but you get to watch your line die out. So, I mean, that's pretty harsh.
Yeah, they were serious about the curses here.
Oh, yeah. See, this is why we're taking it seriously, and even though you don't believe me that this is a thing, it's a thing.
No. I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't serious about they wanted to be curses. The question is, were the curses actually invoked, and were they actually – because I can write curses. I mean, I can whip out all kinds of curses for us. The question is, will they actually come into play and actually, be something?
And do they actually work?
That's what but I guess we're going to get into the proof of that later in the show also. Now, for those who may not know, I think one of them, invokes Thoth.
Mm-hmm.
So Thoth, again, some people may not know. Give me a second. I am in midst of multitasking here, which is another word for me. I'm outside with my dog Duke. For those who listen to my show, also know Duke. So he can do. So Thoth is actually a god of writing, magic, wisdom, and the moon. He was a very important god of the ancient Egyptians. Basically, he's said to be self-created or born of the seed of Horus from the fourth set of Set. So a lot of these Egyptians would use the power of Thoth to help invoke these curses. So I don't know. Some people may or may not know who Thoth was.
See, I just assume everyone knows Egyptian gods like I do, so I'm just like, yep.
Some people don't. Well, Thoth it's interesting too. Is to those the Thoth. So a little bit sidetrack. Thoth, again, Aleister Crowley. We may not know who he is. He created what they call a Thoth Oracle deck. A lot of people read into those. They're like, again, they're very similar to my God, my brain just stops. Reading spiritual decks. Dang it. When you tarot cards, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Their Thoth is a type of tarot card or oracle card. So because Aleister Crowley got really into Egyptian lore, Egyptian gods, Egyptian magic and stuff like that. So some people might have heard of, and that deck was brought out in the 50s, I believe. So some people may know it that way also. Also, completely pointless conversation, but
no, not at all. That's very interesting.
So,
all right,
back into
yes. All right, so we were talking about the curses and stuff, and so a lot of people say the curse is kind of like a modern thing, but actually they've been reported since about the beginning of the 19th century, which is kind of when the Europeans found, quote unquote, found Egypt, and they kind of became obsessed with it. But it was all oral tradition at that point. It was all lore and legend, and did you hear what happened to so-and-so who busted into the tomb and, his person died, because a big part of that was that because hieroglyphs were not actually deciphered before that point. So even if there was something written on the tomb wall that said, don't bust this open or you're going to die, no one could read it anyway. So that was kind of a big part of it, was like they might have been busting into tombs all over the place, but nobody could read it. So so there are some pre-hieroglyphic, I'm going to call it instances of curses that kind of have made it through the test of time. So in 1699, Louis Pincher wrote about a Polish traveler who bought 2 mummies and then sailed home with the mummies in the cargo hold of his ship. The traveler was alarmed by recurring visions of 2 specters, and the ship was caught in the stormy seas. And the traveler actually panicked and threw the mummies overboard. And the minute he threw the mummies overboard, the storm stopped and he no longer had any more visitations. And also there was an archaeologist excavating at Qam Abu Belu, who was transporting a number of artifacts from the site to, I guess, a museum or something. His cousin died later that day. His uncle died exactly a year later, and his aunt died exactly 3 years later. You don't want to be in that branch of the family. He later found the curse carved on the tomb of the builders of the pyramids of Giza, and it says, quote, "As for all men who shall enter my tomb impure, there will be judgment, an end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird and cast the fear into myself." So he's the one that actually discovered that exact curse. He later removed 2 child mummies from Bahiriya Oasis and was reportedly haunted by the children in his dreams, and it did not stop until the mummies were reunited with the mummy of their father in the Egyptian Museum. So, I mean, these were all pre-translation of hieroglyphs and kind of like oral legends that were passed down, which I think was kind of cool. So, I mean, there is a groundwork for this whole concept of a curse in the tomb, even before we find Tut.
Yes, I'm sorry. I got sidetracked a little bit. I was reading the chat room. But that's interesting in the fact that they, kept writing it, but the fact that they were able to decipher it. But that hasn't stopped anyone. Again, like you talked earlier in the show, Josh Gates continued to. He went inside there, and so it's interesting. I don't think the only civilization has really done this, though, as far as putting curses on. Because we've heard of different pyramids through different, in the Incas and stuff like that. But from understand, so far, Egyptians are the only one who actually put curses on anyone entering into their tombs and stuff like that. So that's also kind of, an interesting side thing.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into Tut's curse, because I've realized we're at 20 minutes into the show. We haven't actually got to Tut yet. So I'm going to shoot through kind of who Tut was real quickly for anybody who doesn't know. And then we'll talk a little bit about his tomb and then the curse that comes through it. So Tutankhamun, which is actually the proper way to pronounce it, who was also called Tutankhamun, which means the living image of Aten at birth. And then he also had another name that was possibly Nibherera. He was a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty and most likely ruled from 1332 to 1323 BC, in a period known as the New Kingdom. He was the son of Akhenaten, who was also known as Amenhotep IV. He was 9 or 10 when he was finally made pharaoh. He was married to his half-sister, Ankhesenpaten, who would later become known as Anck-su-namun, and he was the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. A lot of people have heard of the Queen Nefertiti. They had 2 infant daughters who would die, one at 5 months premature and one at the full 9-month gestation, who was born with probably something like similar to spina bifida, scoliosis, and Spengler's deformity. And a lot of researchers kind of chalk that up to the fact that there's a lot of incest because he did marry his half-sister. Tut's mother was most likely his father's cousin or sister, and his wife was his half-sister. And they believed that interbreeding was very common to keep bloodlines pure and holy, but unfortunately it led to a lot of premature births and children born with a lot of funky deformities. Due to his age, Tut had an advisor by the name of General Horemheb, who Tut would call the Lord of the Land. That was his official title. Horemheb also often wrote about having to calm the young king's temper while he was serving as advisor. Tut ended the worship of the god Aten and restored Amun, a move that undid a lot of the changes that his father had made. If you've ever read anything about Akhenaten, Amenhotep, the fact that he actually shifts, he tells the entire country, by the way, we're going to stop worshiping Amun and we're going to go worship Aten. He literally picks up the entire capital, moves it to another city, and says, this is the new capital, and it's all about Aten. It's fascinating. If you ever have time, read that stuff. But I digress. So he being Tut, moved the capital back to Thebes, abandoned Akhenaten city, and he changed his name from Tutankhamun to reinforce his change. Tut is also responsible for starting the Temple of Karnak and many other monuments that unfortunately get actually written off to other pharaohs, especially because of what you said, where they're stomping out people that came before him. Physically, Tut was fairly small. He was probably about 5'6". He had a very large overbite, incisors, and probably a cleft palate and scoliosis. In 2010, they did a scan of the mummy that showed that Tut also had a deformity in his left foot that caused him to walk with a limp and a cane. And he also showed signs of multiple strains of malaria, which he is also the oldest known record of the disease malaria, which is interesting. The malaria mixed with a fracture of his left thigh probably caused his death, according to the National Geographic study that was published in 2005. However, in 2013, another study was done by the Cranfield Institute that did what they called a virtual autopsy, and based on the wound patterns, created a possible chariot crash scenario. They claimed Tut fell out of a chariot and was on his knees when another chariot, or perhaps debris from his own chariot, slammed into him and broke his pelvis and ribs. The study cited some of Carter's notes that parts of the body appeared burned. However, certain embalming oils mixed with oxygen and linen can sometimes cause a chemical reaction on a body that looks like a burn. And then in 2014, however, the study was kind of marked inconclusive because most of the injuries mentioned were obtained posthumously, including the head injury that many people said for a long time they believed that he was actually knocked on the head and killed that way. But all that stuff was done posthumously. Further scans showed that Tut had a club foot, which would have made riding in a chariot fairly difficult, if not impossible. And it should be said that some orthopedic doctors have argued that Tut's foot is in a tweaked position due to mummification and actually not a deformity. So he might have actually been a fairly healthy, physically healthy guy. But it just depends on who you ask. And it's hard to look at a 3,000-year-old mummy and say, yes, you have a deformity, or no, you've just been under the ground for a long time. Many orthopedic doctors believe that the bones in the foot appear normal, and the walking sticks and canes that are often said to be a symbol of his deformity are actually just status symbols, and they were also weapons for hand-to-hand combat. So it's very interesting to kind of hear the back and forth between people and with how they think he died. However, everyone seems to agree that no matter how he died, it was sudden and unexpected, and he also died away from home. So he wasn't in a palace when he died, and that's proven because he was rushed back home and quickly embalmed and mummified. And he had to, because there's a tradition that he have to be mummified and buried in 70 days between death and burial. There's no first-hand accounts of Tut's life or death other than the carvings and decorations in his tomb itself. And his reign was not long or politically significant, but his tomb was one of the most important finds in Egyptology. So I'm going to go into the tomb. Do you have anything you want to talk about his life? He didn't do much in a couple years, but he's still significant, I guess. Good.
Yeah. I still wonder, even how politics today happen, you know what I'm saying? You don't think that maybe a political angle would have come into play? The fact that he moved the whole country to a different capital, moved the gods to a different god. You just have to wonder sometimes if there wasn't some kind of political play. The fact that he was 10 years old and throwing fits. Yeah, he was a spoiled brat.
Well, he was a little kid. Yeah, he was a little kid who suddenly became like the center of the world. Now, the moving of the capital thing is actually often written back to Horemheb, who was his kind of lord of the land as a main advisor, because his father actually had moved it in the first place, and everyone kind of protested that like hardcore until.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
so he moved it back.
So he actually was
his father moved it,
yep.
And
yeah. So his father and Nefertiti moved it. Nefertiti actually was a big part of that. As I say, if you ever have a few minutes, read that story, because that's a fascinating story about how Akhenaten moved everybody down and changed everything on everybody, changed everybody's name. They became a thing. But
why they have these long names? Why couldn't they just have a simple name like Bob and Mark or James? I mean, those are good, easy names. Think of these names that are a mile long, man.
Well, because, okay, so when you're the pharaoh, I actually know the answer to this. So when you're the pharaoh, you have to invoke the god of your protection, and you have to invoke some sign that you're the living relic of a deity. So Tutankhamun, or Tutankamun, at one point he actually had to change his name because when he was born, they were I just forgot what Tutankamun was when he was born, and then he became Tutankhamun, which is when he went from Aten to Amun. Nope, I got that backwards. Sorry, he was born. Whatever. So he was the living image of Aten, is actually what Tutankhamun means. So the living image of the god Aten. So when you get these names, so Ankhsenepaten, who would be the queen of the god of Aten, which is how it goes. So I mean, it's kind of that's the way they build it. So when you're Joe Schmo who works in the brick making, your name probably is something like Bob. But since you are the pharaoh, who is the living image of a deity, you have to have a name that invokes not only your protective deity, but proves that you are connected to that deity.
Oh, so it's really the meanings of a whole bunch of gods slapped together in one long
Exactly,
thing.
yeah.
So.
But he probably went by Tut. So, and if he didn't, then I'm going by Tut because it's shorter, and I trip over words. So,
Oh, you're much better at this than I am, man. Yeah, I was reading through some of the stuff, and I'm like, wow, she's pronouncing all this stuff like half correct. I better get 2 letters in, and I'm like, and I spell it out for people because I can't even.
Yeah,
I'm horrible at that.
I looked up a lot of these beforehand just to make sure. My version has them all spelled out phonetically. But the find of King Tut's tomb was kind of one of the start of modern Egyptology and the European obsession with mummies and everything mummy that you could do. So King Tut was found in the Valley of the Kings, and his tomb is currently designated KV, so Valley of the Kings 62. It was found by Howard Carter in 1922, and Howard Carter was a fairly famous British Egyptologist. The tomb is well known because it was so untouched when they found it that it appeared to be relatively clean. There was not a lot of kind of poaching or anything like that. So it was found under the remains of a workman's hut that was built in the Ramesside period, which is the 20th dynasty. And it's probably because it was built under the huts, or actually the huts were built on top of it, that it wasn't really kind of pilfered much. So it did actually appear to be robbed and resealed twice. However, they never made it to the room where the mummy actually was. So the densely packed items were in disarray because of the hurried way that it was completed, and then also because there were 2 robberies. And it was a relatively small-sized tomb for the pharaoh. Generally, pharaohs had fairly large tombs with multiple rooms and antechambers and treasuries and all kinds of things. So Tut was actually buried because of the speed at which he died and the speed at which he had to be buried. He was actually buried in somebody else's tomb. The tomb that he's in was not designed for him. And that's one of the things people have kind of debated is whose tomb is he actually in? So who thought they were going to die before the king, who then ended up having to give up their tomb for the king? And where'd that guy end up?
Suck. Imagine people making fun of him. Oh, dude, you just lost your tomb.
Yeah.
I know, that guy sucks. Great, take my tomb.
Yeah. Where am I going to be? I'm going to be over there in the closet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people have kind of speculated that it was done for a high-ranking official or a priest, but again, it was redecorated and repurposed when Tut died suddenly. And the fact that the burial chamber walls are the only ones that are actually decorated is a huge clue that this is not done a normal process. So normally, a pharaoh's tomb is going to be the most elaborate thing you've ever seen. This is fairly plain and pretty clean. So the tomb itself is 16 steps leading down into an entrance corridor and an antechamber. Which is where the king would have been embalmed. And then this is as far as any of the robbers actually got into the tomb. And this is where the items were most jumbled and kind of piled up. Beyond the antechamber is the burial chamber, and this is, like I said, the only decorated part of the tomb. It had 4 gilded wooden shrines surrounding the sarcophagus, and the sarcophagus is granite. Each corner of a stone of different colors appeared to be constructed for another owner and then repurposed for Tut, like we said. So I'm not sure who actually had to give up their sarcophagus too, but hopefully he did not die anytime soon. There are 3 mummy-form coffins inside the sarcophagus. So the coffins, that's probably what you think of when you think of sarcophagus, is actually the actual coffins that are shaped like a person with a person's face. And those are actually mummy-form coffins. The sarcophagus is a big square box. The mummy himself, when you got all the way down to him, had a gold mask, bands, and other funerary items still present on his body, which is, again, a rare find. Off the burial chamber was a treasury that contained 5,000 items, mostly funerary and ritual in nature, including the canopic jars and 2 fetuses that appeared to be the offspring of the king, which we talked about before, the 2 babies that passed away. There's also an annex used to store oils, ointments, food, and wine. 26 jars contained wine when they actually opened it in 1922. In 1927, they opened the jars and they still had wine in them. And as of 2015, they were still suggesting there were undiscovered chambers. However, in 2018, the Ministry of State of Antiquities, which is the Egyptian version of kind of like the ultimate in everything Egypt, reviewed and accepted the University of Turin study, which said that there is nothing else. That is it. The rooms that you found is all that to be found. So I'm going to skip over. I actually have like lots of detail about finding the shrine and everything that was in the shrine, but I'm going to skip over because I want to get to the actual curse of Tut's tomb. So let's see. So the first steps of the tomb were just uncovered in November 4th, 1922. The second and third door to the burial chambers were still sealed at that time. The sarcophagus of Tut was actually unsealed February 12th of 1924. So it took them a year and a half to get actually to the tomb of Tut, like to get through all the doors, to get through everything. After arguments with Antiquities Services in April of that year, Carter actually left Egypt for the United States, and in January and left Tut there. Like, he just kind of abandoned him. In 1925, he returned, and between October 12th and 28th, he removed the covers of the 3 sarcophagi and exposed the mummy himself. Tut was actually brought out to the sun for the first time on November 11th, 1924. So it took them a full 2 years to get through all the antechamber stuff and bring it back. So the famous Egyptologist James Henry Breasted worked with Carter soon after the first opening of the tomb. He reported how Carter sent a message on an errand to his house. Upon approaching his home, the messenger thought he heard a faint, almost human cry, and upon reaching the entrance, he saw a birdcage occupied by a cobra, which is the symbol of the Egyptian monarchy. Carter's canary had died in the cobra's mouth, and this actually was the start of the rumors of the curse of King Tut. Was a messenger saw a cobra eating a bird.
Now, I have a question there.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds unique. My question is, was this something that happened frequently around these areas? Did snakes come in homes and eat canaries and stuff like that? Or was this like, it was like me here, I live in Florida. If a gator came into my house and started eating my cat, I would be freaked out how to get in the house, that kind of thing. So that's the question there. It's like, yeah, I when I read that, I'm like, did that happen frequently? Was that something? Because it's interest, birdcage occupied. I just find the whole thing interesting. That's all. I would like to know more. Like,
I will ask the cobra and see what he says.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was something like, because around here we have possums. We have saying, hey, we found a dead possum in the driveway. Well, that's going to happen. Which we have.
But so if you found a cobra, not only did it get into the house, it got into the birdcage and was eating the bird. So I feel like that's not a super common thing that's going to happen. There are cobras in Egypt, I'm assuming, especially since it's a symbol of the monarchy. But I'm not entirely sure how often cobras actually bust in and eat people's pets.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, if it's something, it happens every now and then it wouldn't make it. But if it's like, I've never heard of that, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's why. But
well, if Indiana Jones is to be believed, you should always be afraid of the snakes.
People, I love snakes. Snakes are just only a few snakes that really hurt you anyways. So
snakes are freaky. They have no legs. It just freaks me out. Like, things need legs. I don't know why, but they do. All right, so
okay.
The first publication of the word curse related to the mummy's tomb was actually in the New York Times on December 22nd, 1922. And it was actually related to Marie Corelli, who was an English novelist and mystic who wrote a letter and stated that the dire punishment would follow any intrusion into a sealed tomb. She did not specifically say this was related to King Tut's tomb. However, the reporter who actually did the story put Tut and the curse and her prediction together. So that's kind of the first written record of the word King Tut's curse. So,
dun, dun, dun.
Yes. On that note, no, I'm just kidding. You're all gonna die because you just heard this now. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No one's dying. Thank you. All right. I'm gonna get an angry letter again. A black and gold Anubis shrine depicting a jackal on a pedestal was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. And Anubis was the ancient god of the dead. If you're not familiar, he's the one with the dog head. He kind of has like the big pointy ears and all that kind of stuff. And an inscription on the Anubis shrine stated, "It is I who hinder the sand from choking the secret chamber. I am for the protection of the deceased." And people are saying that's actually the curse of King Tut, is actually this Anubis statue where it says, basically, my job is to protect the deceased. Yeah. So I'm not sure of that, but Lord Carnarvon, who actually was one of the funders of the dig, actually signed an exclusive contract with the Times in London, which created a big problem in the press because he would report the findings to them, they would print it, and they were the only ones who were allowed to print it. However, it forced journalists elsewhere to find ways to cover Tut, and that's where you get the Anubis Curse, that's where you get the Times article, and that kind of built out. And actually, it's been found that the statue actually says those lines. However, some journalists decided to grab it and run with it, and they actually added the words, "And I will kill all those who cross this threshold into the sacred precincts of the royal king who lives forever." So journalists decided to grab it and run.
So these reporters made up stuff?
Fake news. It's all fake news.
It's been doing that for 100 years now.
Well, that's what I say. What is that? Sex and Death Cell? Isn't that the thing?
Yeah. It's funny.
All right. So, however, there are a lot of really suspicious deaths that go around King Tut's tomb. So I'm going to run through them here. Feel free to jump in at any time and insert some commentary. But the first one that was actually reported in association to what? No, he's really dead.
Fake.
He's actually dead. All right, so Lord George. Yeah, all right, I'm killing this one. Lord, I can do Egyptian names. I'm killing the word George. Sorry, Lord George Herbert Carnarvon, who is the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was the first death actually associated with the King Tut curse. He died 4 months and 7 days after opening the tomb. He was the chief financial backer of the Tut excavation and many of Carter's digs. He was bitten by a mosquito on March 9th, 1923. And then he actually cut the bite while shaving, which led to blood poisoning from the resulting infection. He then died on April 5th, 1923, and his death caused this huge media frenzy, as people said he was the first victim of Tut's curse. So a lot of people have actually done studies on his death. Go ahead. What did you say? You all right?
No, go ahead. Oh. Yeah. My brain was thinking about something else when you said that.
Oh, sorry. It sounded like you fell off a chair. You're like, and whoa. Yeah, sorry. It's been proposed, actually, through some of these studies that mycotoxins, mycotoxins, and fungi from the tomb actually caused the infection, but no one else, and there's 25 men that actually entered the tomb in that time period, had similar infections, and if it had been something like that, it would have been passed off to somebody else as well. Somebody would have gotten some form of infection other than him. Later studies of the Earl's medical records show that Carnarvon had a weak immune system already. He was easily overwhelmed by the bacterial infection of his cut, and he probably did not seek a lot of treatment for it. When he cut himself, he probably just went, I cut myself shaving. He stuck a Band-Aid on it or whatever and went on, and then it caused him to get blood poisoning. So the saddest story of this whole thing is Lord Carnarvon's dog died in May of 1923.
Now, so I read that, and I'm like, okay, was the dog old?
No, but the dog was in Egypt, so therefore he's associated with the dog went everywhere with Lord Carnarvon, so he was like his traveling companion. So the dog is also associated with King Tut's tomb.
Okay.
All right, we're going to hang up our skepticism, and we're just going to run through all these because there's a lot of them. George J. Gould I was a visitor to the tomb who developed a fever. Actually, immediately following his visit, he died in France on May 16, 1923. Prince Ali Kamel Fameh Bey of Egypt was shot to death by his wife, Marguerite Alibert, on July 10, 1923.
Okay, that right there is not so much a curse as more like he was probably a dick and he deserved to get shot. But that's just my opinion.
Yes, but he was a prince when they found the tomb, therefore he's associated with Tut. Shush. So this is the best name ever, by the way. Colonel the Honorable Aubrey Herbert, MP. I just want to go.
What's the MP for? Ministry of, or I say it's military police, but I don't think that counts here.
I think it's most professional. No, I know.
Now I got to figure that out. It's going to drive me nuts.
All right, you Google that while I read this. So he's the half-brother of Lord Carnarvon, and he actually became nearly blind and died on September 26, 1923, related from blood poisoning related to a dental procedure intended to restore his eyesight. So because he's related to Lord Carnarvon, MP means member of Parliament.
Oh, thank you, CC.
Yeah, somebody's smarter than us. All right. So this guy had dental procedure to try and fix his eyesight, which I don't entirely understand how that works, but he died. So because he's related to Lord Carnarvon, he gets put under King Tut. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who was a radiologist who x-rayed Tut, actually died on January 15th, 1924 from a mysterious illness. Undefined mysterious illness. That's the first one that actually sounds like the curse, but just me.
Yes.
Hi, Evelyn White was a British archaeologist who visited the tomb, and after seeing the curse sweep through the excavators, he hung himself on 1924, supposedly writing a note in his own blood saying, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." Sounds like somebody was drinking.
Oh. She was high.
Or drinking. I'm not sure which, yeah.
Interesting. Where's the letter, though?
Yes, he wrote, supposedly in his own blood he wrote this letter, so... You know.
Right, well, that would be easy. If you had the letter, you could do a DNA test on it, and then poof, that would tell you. But probably it disappeared.
Yeah, I feel like that one kind of went away, yeah. Sir Lee Stack, who was the Governor General of Sudan, died November 19th, 1924, and was assassinated while driving through Cairo. I guess I'm not entirely sure how he's attached to Tut, but he is, so there he is. Aaron Ember, who is an American archaeologist, was present when the tomb was opened, and he died in 1926 when his home in Baltimore burned down. He could have exited safely, but his wife encouraged him to save a manuscript he'd been working on while she fetched their son. Sadly, the whole family and the family's maid died, and the name of Ember's manuscript was actually the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Now, see, that I can almost believe could be a curse, because that kind of ties in. He was there. He was writing a book about it. You know what I'm saying? He seemed to be more connected to the whole thing. Making the fact he was, he was an Egyptian. I can't ever say the word Egyptologist.
Egyptologist.
Yeah. So either way, but he studied Egypt and stuff like that. So to me, that would be if there was a true curse, that could be. He was the first one. That ended him, his wife. To the son and the family, the maid, and the son, so.
Yep, everybody, yep. So
he could have been banging her, so that's why she died too.
Yeah, so him and the one with the mysterious illness with no definition. Those are the first two that actually kind of fall legally under the curse thing. But A.C. Mace, who was a member of the excavation team, died in 1928 from arsenic poisoning.
Someone was pissed at him.
Yeah. The honorable.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we don't know why or how. He could have had gambling debts. He could have had a whole bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of questions around that one. Yeah. But the Honorable Mervyn Herbert, who is the brother of Aubrey Herbert, died on May 26, 1929 from malarial pneumonia. That's just fun to say. Captain Richard Bethel, who was Carter's personal secretary, actually died November 15, 1929. He died in the bed in a Mayfair club, which is a private gentleman's club, who was the victim of a suspected smothering. So I'm going to say someone caught him there, and he wasn't supposed to be there.
Oh, he didn't pay his bill, you know what I mean.
That too.
He got pissed.
Yeah. Richard Luttrell Plinkington Bethel, who was the third Baron Westbury, who was also the father of Captain Richard Bethel, also died February 20th, 1930, after he threw himself off his 7th floor apartment. So his son died in 1929 of smothering, and then he throws himself off an apartment building. Interesting.
That's him. Had all kinds of problems.
Yeah. So Howard Carter himself died March 1939 from Hodgkin's disease. William Carter died also in 1939. Englishman Joel Wolfe, who was a British industrialist. I didn't write down the year he died, so apparently. He also died. Sorry, sucks for him. Mohammed Ibrahim, who was Egypt's director of antiquities at the time, died in 1966. I'm not entirely sure how 1966 ties into 1929, but sure.
I could be just been plain old age.
And Gamal Mahrez, another one of directors of antiquities, died in 1972. And they're all the ones that are technically reported tied in. There's some other ones too. Overall, there were 11 deaths directly related to the opening of Tut's tomb in the first 10 years, which is kind of what fueled this whole, King Tut's curse kind of thing. Additionally, Sir Bruce Ingram was a friend of Carter's, and Carter gave Ingram a paperweight that was a mummified hand wearing a bracelet that said, "Cursed be to he who moved my body." That's on the bracelet itself. So Ingram's house actually burned to the ground not long after receiving the gift, and when he tried to rebuild his house, a flood wiped out the whole area. So that's the
kind of
one.
Cool. I mean, that one seems a little bit more.
So he's not dead, but his hand kind of like took him out. There's a little bit of a hand of glory moment kind of thing going on there, but I feel like that's the only one that actually says curse. I don't know.
Yeah.
All these other people died of unfortunate things, but that's the only one that kind of screams curse to me. Yeah. All right. So I know you don't believe in the curse, but do you want to hear some of the science behind why people think it's true or not true?
Yeah. No, I think it's cool.
All right. So the British Medical Journal did a study in 2002, and they looked at the survival rates of the 44 Westerners whom Carter had identified being present at the tomb opening. So the mean age of death for those 25, and then they compared that with people who weren't there, and it found no significant association between potential exposure to the mummy's curse and the survival, as well as no sign at all that those who were exposed were more likely to die in 10 years. So basically they said statistically, people died because there was a lot of people there, and guess what? People die. And generally when you have a large amount of people, there are some suspicious deaths that happen. So, I mean, from them, basically it came down to, I got nothing. And then Herbert Winlock, the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, made his own calculation about the effectiveness of King Tut's curse. And according to Winlock's figures, 22 people present when the tomb opened in 1922, only 6 of them had died in 1934. Of the 22 people present at the opening of the sarcophagus in 24, only 2 died by 1934. So there were 10 people there when the mummy was unwrapped in 1924, and every single one of them made it to 1934. So his math
why
says...
Why did they put a 10-year timeline on it? Is that something that was written in the curses?
Well, no, I think it's just because for a while they were saying like, oh, I mean, think of all the people that we just read through that died in the 20s and the 30s. They're kind of saying, well, all these people were suspicious they died and they were associated with Tut in the first 10 years. So yeah. I think that's kind of what the math they were doing. It's like, all right, well, guess what? There was 20 people there. Statistically, someone's going to die. It's going to happen. Yep. And one of the cool things that I actually found on this really bizarre, obscure website was actually they said that the curse started with the finding of the 4 magic blocks in the tomb of the alcove at the 4 compass points. This is the first time I ever saw that. But each block is supposedly carved with the spells from the Book of the Dead. And they said that by moving these blocks, they actually triggered the curse, and that's why all these people died. So that's why it didn't affect everyone, because it wasn't the opening of the tomb so much as only the people that moved the blocks were the ones that got associated with the curse. So another different theory. So I don't know.
Now,
I think the whole thing's cool.
It says each block is carved with spells from the Book of the Dead.
Yes.
What is this Book of the Dead?
The Book of the Dead is, it's incantations. It's actually like a Egyptian prayer book. And there's a couple different kind of, I'm going to say interpretations of it, but generally it's accepted that it's how you invoke the gods to protect the living, to bring people back to life, to curse people, to do kind of all the nasty things that we're talking about.
Someone actually written this thing out, so it's translated from Egyptian.
Oh yeah,
I'm assuming everything. That's the other thing. And this gets me. So Egyptians, to make sure I'm right, use hieroglyphics, right? So a bird eating a snake could mean breakfast. I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Well, how do we? I mean, it's just like emojis today. People send you an emoji on text, and they actually send you a smiley face when you said something rude. But, I mean, are you being sarcastic or are you being an ass? You know what I'm saying? It's all interpretation. So would you think that we would maybe interpret some of those hieroglyphics as wrong?
And they have. They've actually they've interpreted them and reinterpreted them and changed their kind of the opinions over the years for sure. The difference between hieroglyphics and, kind of what you're describing, like the emoji conversations that people have, is that hieroglyphics actually have a set standard. So basically you would put a bird, a sun, and a river, and it always means the Nile. You put this symbol, this symbol, this symbol, it always means this person's name, right? And there's no kind of misinterpretation because they are words. They're just, it's a pictograph language, I believe, is the type of language that it is. So basically, instead of using letters, they just use these combinations of symbols to be their words and everything. So just like you would pick up an English written book and say, scientifically, studies have been done to disprove the curse. They have their own versions of, kind of pictures that make that up. And there's very little room for misinterpretation because, you're not putting any kind of context around it. It's just those are the words that it says. But yes, you are right. They have actually interpreted and reinterpreted hieroglyphics a couple of times, and people have actually questioned, so and so translated it this way, but I think this is more of a sun god rather than a Nile god kind of thing. So that and there are a couple of symbols that are pretty close together. It's really cool though.
Very good.
I have a book on the grammar of ancient Egypt. It's fascinating. I'm a huge nerd. I have just revealed that to the entire world, as I have a copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I have a book on ancient Egyptian grammar. yes, okay. So anyway,
that's what I've always said about ancient religious texts. They're translating it from this language to this language. Sometimes words if there's no words for, if there's no word for grass, then make up a word that may not mean, you know what I'm saying? So I always, that gets into so many different things in life, and especially, the way they spoke and what they thought, their syntax. It kind of reminds me of programming. Believe it or not, 20, 25, 30 years ago, programming was truly done differently than it's done today. And most people don't know that, but like back in the 80s when I was doing programming, we would a lot of stuff was written line by line, number by number. Now we don't even do it that way at all. It's all completely different. So that's just a side thought. So the question is, are these curses real? Well, it's interesting. If it's not, there's a lot of correlations. It seems to be, if you kind of point around that this person died of this and this person died of that. So I guess if you actually went to another, could you go to? Is there other pharaohs that have curses on them besides King Tut?
There are, but none that have this kind of payout, I guess. I did look and tried to see if like any of the other, tombs that had been opened had this kind of correlation to them, and I feel like some of them did, but it was like, one guy died, therefore it was the curse, and that was it. So this is the only one that really had like this big dramatic list of people. Whether or not you consider the guy that paid for the funding for the trip's dog as associated with it or not, that's kind of up to you. But all right, so final thought since we're out of time. Curse, real or no?
I have a hard time believing it is. I just think it's a lot of fun, interesting, could be kind of fact, but I just don't see how it really could be. But then the pagan side of me says yes, because there is power in words, and power in intention, and you never know what the gods are going to do.
All right, well, I choose to believe that the snake eating the bird was the sign of the apocalypse coming, and that all these people died because they opened King Tut's tomb. I'm going to go with that.
So, okay.
I'm going to go with that.
That sounds great.
All right, so thank you very much. I hope you had fun today and that everybody learned something. And,
thank you again.
All right, guys, we're going to sign off. So, as always, I'm Rebecca, and we'll see you in the shadows.